Nigeria's president says new tactics are needed to fight Boko Haram. About 500 people, mostly Muslims, have already been killed in attacks this year. But what could these tactics be? Is a crackdown on Boko Haram the solution, or is dialogue still an option? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Veronica Pedrosa. Suicide bombings on churches and reprisal attacks on Muslims are intensifying in northern Nigeria in spite of several military crackdowns and a state of emergency. Now, the President Goodluck Jonathan has fired his defence minister and national security advisor, saying the government needs new tactics to fight the militant group Boko Haram. He said, "We think some new persons have to come in to change tactics in our fight against terrorism. It's not that they were not working, but just that we need to change tactics." He went on to say Boko Haram has no face and the government will not dialogue with faceless people. They must come out and tell us why they're doing what they're doing. So let's take a look at the recent attacks in Nigeria's north. They've been grappling with Boko Haram for months. There were coordinated attacks in churches on Christmas Day. At least 35 people were killed. But earlier this month, Boko Haram claimed responsibility for another attack on churches. There were reprisal attacks and days of violent clashes followed. At least 106 people were killed. Boko Haram says it's responsible for the church attacks, and this is what we know about the group. Boko Haram is a radical armed group based in Nigeria. It says it wants to wipe out any Western influence in the north of the country. The group also wants to create an Islamic state in the north. Though recent attacks involved bombings, their trademark's been to use gunmen on motorbikes to kill police, politicians, and anyone who criticises them. So will new tactics be enough to fight Boko Haram? To help answer this question and more, we're joined by our guests from Abuja, Chinedu Nwagu, Manager for Accountability and Justice at Clean Foundation. That's a Nigerian NGO that's been working with police on reforming its force. From Boston, Darren Kew, Associate Professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Darren's also author of an upcoming book called Democracy, Conflict Resolution and Civil Society in Nigeria. From Manchester, Musa Aliyu is Associate Lecturer of History, Politics, Media and Communications at Liverpool Hope University. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. I want to start in Abuja and ask you, Chinedu Nwagu, what does President Jonathan really mean when he talks about new tactics?
Well, one would presume he is going outside of the existing approach to policing and engaging security challenges in Nigeria that we've had before this time, because this whole issue of bombings is new and it's something that's not very that had not been
but it's not like he's put any detail on his plans.
Well, yeah, that's the issue we are waiting for him to flesh out. We've been hearing him talk about, reviewing the security architecture of the country, to deal with the new challenges that are coming up on the horizon. But then we're waiting for him to flesh some of these things out and then to see them broken down into well thought out action plans and strategies. And that is yet to happen. So we're hoping sooner than later he would hit the ground running, because, it's the problem that has lingered for a little too long and Nigerians are very uncomfortable with it.
Musa Aliyu in Manchester, can you tell us what you think about the way that Goodluck Jonathan's dealt with the situation so far? I mean, Chinedu there's talking about waiting, but haven't we been waiting for a long time already?
Yeah, we've waited for too long, actually. What I was hoping to see President Jonathan do at this time is to, first of all, go back and look at history, things that have happened previously. Since 1980, we've had crises like this, and after each of these crises, we've had commissions set up coming out with white papers. None of those white papers has so far been implemented. I would want to see President Jonathan go back, sit down, look at those white papers and see what those recommendations were and try to implement some of them. And one other thing that probably might help at this point, because we have, in 2010, we had Jonathan changing the NSO then. who was General Al-Qasir, Al-Wali
National
Qasir,
Security
and replacing
Officer.
him with, yes, please, and replacing him with Aliyu Gusau, General Aliyu Gusau. And then after then, we had General Aziza coming in. After General Azazi had gone now, we've had someone who is very close to Aliyu Gusau coming in again. So there is a possibility that he's trying to kind of appease to the north by getting somebody that will stabilize his government for him. One thing he could do is by taking advantage of this opportunity of having somebody like Colonel Sambode Suki in office as NSO, to use his position, get his father, who was the former Sultan of Sokoto, to bring these people who the president said are faceless, to come out in the open and agree to do some dialogue with the government. That might help to tackle the situation at the minute.
But Darren Kew, I'd like to turn to you for some international perspective. Just on Thursday, the United States has actually named the leader of Boko Haram, Abu Bakr Shiba, as a global terrorist. Can you tell us about the international interest in what's going on in northern Nigeria? I mean, after all, these attacks have happened only in Nigeria. It seems odd that they're being seen as global.
Sure. I think that the international community has a number of interests here. Obviously, there's the oil production in the south that it's watching very closely, but more importantly are the purported international connections that the Boko Haram movement has with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and then further east with Al-Shabaab in Somalia. I think these connections so far have primarily proven to be communication links and occasional cooperation. They're not formally connected in some way, shape, or form. But there's an increasing attention here in the United States and in Europe to Boko Haram for some of its activities in kidnapping Westerners. One in particular had been kidnapped in Kano and later showed up in Algeria in a hostage swap demand from AQIM in Algeria. So I think these sorts of connections are definitely gaining attention, and there's a growing push on the politics on this end to try to get Nigeria somehow labeled as a terrorist harboring country. And this is sort of an effort to stride the gap in between, because if Boko Haram is labeled as a terror group in the United States, I think that hands Boko Haram a badge of honor, something that it's actually looking for in terms of its political agenda. And I think the Obama administration is very sensitive to that, and they've been very careful to try not to go too far in terms of handing political victories to Boko Haram, but at the same time trying to put some tools in the hands of the Nigerian government so that they can better try to rein in Boko Haram and find a quicker solution to this crisis.
Chinedu Nwagu, you work with policemen. There was a deadly attack in January in which 200 policemen were killed. What is your sense of whether police are now just fed up of the situation? Why can't they get a handle on it? There have been white papers, as Musa Aliyu was just saying. What's gone wrong?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues that come into play here. Beyond the January incident where 200 persons were killed, we also had the incident where the bomb was actually taken to the force headquarters of the Nigerian police force. I mean, that is as close as you can get bringing the battle home to them. But so you've had a very high rate of police casualties in all of these attacks, and then you're still seeing the same patterns repeating themselves over and over again, and nobody seems to be getting a grasp or a handle on things. We are always one or two steps behind. Yes, there have been one or two instances where they said bombs were discovered and defused before they exploded. But overall, we've had the police reacting and not taking the proactive stand. And so I think a few things that are missing here. One is the fact that we are either not gathering intelligence the way we ought to, or we are not making effective use of the intelligence we are gathering. And then also the fact that this is a point where community policing would have been put to optimal use in northern parts of Nigeria, because I mean, these are not people that are coming from across the borders necessarily. These are are indigents of Nigeria. These are citizens of the Federal Republic, and these people live amongst us. So this is where, if we were deploying intelligence gathering as well as we ought to have been doing, dating back to 1st of October, we should have been able to at least contain this situation. But so far, we don't seem to have gotten to that point. Yes, we have acquired new equipment. Yes, we have made promises, but on the ground, feasibly, we are not seeing all these things coming together to guarantee, the kind of security people would want to see.
Yeah, Musa Aliyu, I mean, I wanted to take up something that you were mentioning in your last answer. President Jonathan said that Boko Haram is faceless, that it hasn't come forward. One wonders how they've managed to remain so since their attacks have been gradually intensifying for years.
First of all, let me agree with my colleague that said we have not done enough intelligence gathering. That is one major problem. We ought to have found out the identity of these people. Who are they? Where are they from? And then another thing also that my colleague raised, which I beg to disagree with, is the fact that these people are Nigerians. Yes, some of them are Nigerians, but many of them are also not Nigerians. Take a look at the root of Boko Haram itself. Mohammed Yusuf, who set up that group, Yusufia, had his education in places like Chad and Niger. And then there is a Cameroonian link. There's also a Malian link. Some of the foot soldiers of Boko Haram are actually not Nigerians. They come from across neighboring countries to come and unleash terror in Nigeria. And probably that is one of the reasons why we find it difficult to track these people. One of the things probably President Jonathan needs to do is to agree to, or come to a certain agreement with with the leaders of neighboring countries so that they have a kind of joint intelligence gathering to know exactly what influence is Boko Haram having in those countries and how to actually tackle the problem by jointly working together. That could help in unearthing the faceless group.
So, Darren Kew, let me ask you about that regional perspective. Nuhu Ribadu, who's the former anti-corruption chief in Nigeria and a presidential challenger, has actually said that the Sahel region, of which northern Nigeria is a part, is a time bomb waiting to explode, and that it makes sense to engage Boko Haram now. Can you tell us what you think is the link between what's going on in the Sahel and Boko Haram's intensifying attacks?
Yes, well, I think that it is definitely a region that has some links. I think that Boko Haram is very much a Nigerian phenomenon, and it has its roots very much in the politics of the Northeast in particular. But the borders are very porous, and as my colleagues have said, there are clearly links between the movement and populations elsewhere. But I think it's also important to remember that Boko Haram is not a unified actor. It has many sort of layers to it. At the center is certainly a hardcore right-wing movement that is very well organized and has an operational sophistication that it's proven in terms of the attacks that it's undertaken all across northeastern and north central Nigeria. But it also has other factions that are more moderate or at least more centrist and have sent out overtures to try to talk to the Jonathan government, either through intermediaries or directly. And some of these individuals have been murdered by the right-wing faction, the hardcore. And in addition, some of the Boko Haram feelers that have been put out there, the Nigerian security apparatus have either have arrested them under some circumstances or have also taken brutal responses to it. So I think that there's a fine line there between the efforts to try to reach out and engaging them in communication could be difficult.
All right, so let's take a look at what Boko Haram's aims are. Just want to mention that the group has called for the adoption of Sharia or Islamic law in Nigeria, but it's already in place in much of the country's north. Since the passing of legislation in 1999, 12 states have adopted Sharia law, a move motivated by a desire to do away with injustice. But over a decade later, skeptics of Sharia law say that this has had no positive impact in a region still battling corruption and poverty. Well, Chinedu Nwagu, do you think that the continuing problems with corruption and inefficiency are playing a role?
I would not say they are playing a role. I would say they are part of the very core reasons why we have the continued situation. The incidences in the north, I mean, beyond the initial calls that the group sent out asking for the adoption of Sharia, we have not had them come back to reiterate those demands in very recent times. But the scale of bombings have continued, the casualty rates have continued to increase, and you know the destruction, the wanton destruction in the northern part of the country have only increased. And so if you
And what
go
about
back to the
sectarianism?
basis, you
What
will
about
find out
communal
that the level
violence?
of well, it's not as widespread. I mean, communal violence is only limited to one or two areas, particularly around Jos. In other areas of the northeast, in Maiduguri, Bauchi, Gombe, that have been some of the worst hit states. You don't have communal violence at the scale you have it in Plateau State, in Jos Plateau State, and so that is not basically the challenge. The challenge is that there is little or no government presence in some of these states. Corruption and bad governance continues to thrive in these places in spite of the imposition of Sharia law and in spite of some of the positions that the government would have wanted us to believe. But if you go down into these states, you see little or no government presence. You still see a very wild disconnect between the young people in these states and the government. Educational systems are not functioning, justice systems are crumbling, so there is little or nothing that the people can hold on to that represents for them a linking point with the government. And with that level of disconnect, you have a very conducive atmosphere for the kind of extremism we are seeing in northern Nigeria to thrive. And so that's the situation that is prevailing, and that's where the link the government is yet to make with the people in that region.
Musa Aliyu, that's an extremely serious situation that has been sketched out there by Mr. Nwagu. The fate, as it were, the whole future of Nigeria, it would seem, resting on how Nigeria gets on with dealing with this problem on so many levels.
Exactly. I think Mr. Nwagu is quite right about this, the presence of government not being felt in that part of Nigeria. If you look at the rate of poverty in that part of the country, it's over 70% of the population live below poverty line. And like I mentioned earlier, Mohammed Yusuf, who set up this group, Boko Haram, initially as Yusufia, had a background in Cameroon, Chad, and other neighboring countries because he dropped out of school. He went there, did some Quranic education, and came back to Nigeria to mobilize young people. And because of his charisma, they listened to him. And because of his background, probably as someone who has suffered injustice from politicians, people who hold public offices in the north, but have used the benefits of those offices for their own benefits and people close to them. He was able to mobilize the young people who are also having the same problem, going through the same dilemma like him.
So Musa Ali, let me ask you to pause for a second, because I think our guest in Abuja wants to cut in. Chinedu Nwagu?
Yeah, I think it's very important to underscore the fact that Yusuf was actually at some point part of the government of Borno State. So it's not as if he was too detached from government. He was a commissioner in the state at some point. So he had his, he had a foot in government. He was a part of the system of the government, and yet, could disengage himself from the system somewhat to start up this group. And so I think we should look at it in that context that, governance is basically, plays a very significant role in the crisis we're having in the Northeast, because the very founder himself, it's not like he has always been anti-government. He was a commissioner in Borno State.
Darren Kew in Boston, your upcoming book is called Democracy, Conflict Resolution and Civil Society. Do you see all these layers, as it were, of Nigerian society being able to help fix this situation? I'm just wondering whether, even if President Jonathan was to change his entire cabinet, even if he was voted out and somebody else come in, whether these kind of societal institutions are so entrenched that no one can really get to the core of it.
Well, I want to definitely agree with my colleagues that the core of this crisis is a governance problem, and the massive corruption and problems in the government delivering the basic goods that can deal with the issues of poverty and development. and that progress on these efforts is essential for trying to move away from the circumstances that is giving rise to Boko Haram and other movements across the country.
So is this just a politicking that
yes,
opposition groups say that the president's unable to keep Nigeria secure? Could they?
I think that, yes, I think that a viable political opposition is an essential next step in Nigeria's political and economic development. If you just look to the regional leaders like Ghana, for instance, the rise of viable political opposition was the key turning point that helped to bring Ghana on the path towards better development and better governance. And Nigeria's political opposition has had a very, very difficult time, first of all, getting organized and unified and building a strong base with civil society. But I think the efforts to bring that together are still underway. And then also a very major difference we have now is that we have a reformist at the head of the Electoral Commission, which opens the possibility of better elections the next time around. The elections this time were better than they were in 2007. And I think that we're seeing an upward trajectory. So if the opposition can get together and if civil society can continue to organize, particularly the labor movement and other big civil society groups, to build a coalition for change that can dislodge the PDP, the ruling party, I think that this would be a very important part of the change.
All right,
and as my colleagues rightly mentioned, go ahead.
Darren, we only have a couple of minutes left, so I do want to get a couple of final words from our other guests. In Abuja, Chinedu Nwagu, are you optimistic about how things are going to go over the next year? It is very worrying to see this intensification of attack, reprisal, going communal, sectarian.
Well, I would want to find something, somewhere to hang my optimism on. But for now, I haven't found that hanger. If one were to do an analysis starting from the 1st of October 2010, when we had, the first bomb at the national scene, to this time, you would only see an intensification. You would only see a rise in the frequency of bombings. In the last 1 month, we have had a church go up every Sunday. And so these are issues that are beginning to perplex the mind of the average Nigerian, in as much as we would like to carry on and, go about and hope for the best. But there is really nothing to hope for. And I personally believe that how President Jonathan handles the current security crisis in the Nigeria would be the defining factor in his government. Not what he does with the economy, not how he conducts the 2015 elections, but how he is able to cross the lines and bridge whatever gaps and whatever cracks that are in the society, to unify the country.
All right.
Northern governors are already beginning to complain that the economy of the North is seriously affected by this.
All right, we're going to have to turn immediately to Musa Aliyu in Manchester. President Jonathan has said that the threat posed by Boko Haram is greater than that of the Biafran civil war in the 1960s. Where do you think things are going to go now? Just briefly.
I think what he needs to do at the moment, actually, like my colleagues have mentioned, he needs to be a man, tackle this problem as it is. He has got Somode Suki there. His father, Somode Suki's father, once suggested that there should be a kind of peace committees that should be set up across all levels of the society so that people would engage with the government, help the government in tackling this problem. The issue of civil war, of course, was a very major tragedy for the country, but Boko Haram is a bigger tragedy. I agree with President Jonathan. If he doesn't do something fast, probably that will break up the country. And finally, let me correct the impression actually given by my colleague earlier that Mohammed Yusuf was part of the government. He was not. It was Buji Foyi who was the Commissioner for Religious Affairs. Mohammed Yusuf only nominated Buji Foyi. So what we have actually is a complete detachment by a group from the government, and that trust has to be rebuilt.
Thank you very much indeed to all my guests from Abuja, Chinedu Nwagu, from Boston, Darren Kew, and from Manchester, Musa Aliyu. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. Goodbye.